The wind that swept across the high plains carried the smell of dust and old regrets. It howled through the splintered fence posts and rattled the loose shutters of the Harper homestead, a once proud ranch now stripped of its warmth. Inside, Martha Harper stood at the center of what had been her living room, her hands trembling at her sides. The room was bare except for the ghostly outlines on the walls where pictures once hung, her husband's face among them. He died 2 winters ago, trampled by a spooked horse during a blizzard that froze half the county. After that the wolves came, not the kind with fur and fangs, the kind with papers and boots and cruel smiles. Men who smelled opportunity and grief. Men like Sheriff Dalton Crow. Dalton Crow was a tall, dry-skinned man with a voice like gravel and a heart carved out of stone. He'd arrived at sunrise with a writ of seizure and a dozen deputies behind him, their horses stamping impatiently in the dirt. "That's due, Mrs. Harper," he'd said, rolling the paper between his fingers as if it were nothing more than a cigar. "Your husband owed the Crownfield Bank. Without payment, this land is forfeit." Martha had tried to reason with him, to beg for time, but Crow didn't deal in time, only in endings. Now, as the deputies tossed her last trunk out the front door, she gathered her children, Eli, 10, and little Ruth, barely 6. Their faces were streaked with dirt and fear. "Ma, where are we going to go?" Eli whispered. Martha swallowed the knot in her throat. "Somewhere safer than here," she lied. They stepped out into the sun-blasted yard. Crow watched from his saddle, hat tipped low, chewing on a toothpick like the moment bored him. "This ain't justice," Martha said, her voice cracking. Crow shrugged. "Justice is whatever survives the dust, ma'am. Best learn that now." With that, he spurred his horse and rode off, leaving behind nothing but a swirl of dirt and the echo of finality. Martha walked, past the empty fields that once fed her family, past the creek where her husband had taught Eli to fish. The plains stretched endlessly ahead, shimmering in the heat like a mirage of false promises. They walked until the sun began to bleed red across the horizon. That was when she saw the silhouette of a lone rider cutting through the golden haze. He rode slow, deliberate, like a man who knew the land and didn't fear it. His hat was wide-brimmed, his shoulders strong. A Winchester rifle rested across his back. He stopped when he saw them. "Evening, ma'am," he said. "Name's Daniel Reed. You look like you could use some water." Martha's instinct was to turn away. In the West, help always came with strings. But her children's cracked lips told her pride was a luxury they no longer owned. Daniel handed down a canteen. She drank, then passed it to Eli and Ruth. "Crow took your land, didn't he?" Daniel asked quietly. Martha stared at him. "You know him?" "Everyone does. He's been bleeding widows and ranchers dry for years. Crownfield Bank's just his excuse." "Why would you care?" Daniel looked out at the horizon. "Because I've seen what happens when good people lose their homes. And because a man ought to do what's right even if it costs him." He tipped his hat and said, "Come on. My farm's a few miles east. You and your kids can rest there. No promises beyond that. Just a roof for tonight." The sun dipped lower, and Martha faced the same choice she'd been avoiding since dawn. Trust a stranger or face the cold, open dark. She nodded. As they rode toward the Reed farm, she couldn't shake the feeling that this man's arrival wasn't chance, it was the turning of fate itself. And somewhere far behind them, Sheriff Dalton Crow watched their trail through a spyglass, already planning how to make their new beginning their final mistake. Daniel Reed's farm lay at the edge of the prairie, where the flatlands met a jagged line of red stone hills. It was small, honest work, nothing like the sprawling ranches Crow favored, but it stood strong against the wind. Its barn painted the color of dried blood, and its fences freshly mended. To Martha, it looked like something out of another life. Daniel helped her down from the wagon and guided the children inside. The farmhouse smelled of oak smoke and leather. It was simple, but it was safe. "You can stay here as long as you need," Daniel said. "But Crow won't leave you be. He never does." That truth settled heavy in her chest. At dawn, the pounding of hooves shook the ground. Daniel stepped outside, rifle already in hand. Across the yard, Crow and his deputies emerged from the dust like devils riding out of hell. "Reed!" Crow called. That woman belongs to the law. She's harboring stolen bank property. Daniel didn't flinch. You threw her out with nothing but her children. That ain't the law. That's cruelty. Crow's eyes narrowed. Step aside, or you'll find yourself charged with obstruction and maybe something worse. Martha stood in the doorway, her pulse racing. She knew Crow's kind. He would burn Daniel's farm down before he'd admit defeat. Daniel, she said softly, maybe I should go. Daniel shook his head. You go now, Crow wins. He keeps winning because good people stay scared. The deputies drew their guns. The standoff felt endless, the kind of moment that made men legends or graves. Finally, Crow smirked. Fine, keep your charity case. But don't say I didn't warn you. They rode off, but Martha could feel the threat lingering like gun smoke. That night flames lit the sky. Daniel's barn burned bright, the crackle of timber mixing with the terrified cries of the horses trapped inside. Crow's warning had come true. Daniel and Eli worked side by side, cutting down burning beams and leading the animals out. Martha grabbed buckets, tears streaming down her face as the heat seared her skin. By sunrise, the barn was ash. I'm sorry, Martha whispered. This is because of me. Daniel wiped the soot from his hands. No, it's because Crow thinks fear makes him king. Now I've got a reason to stand against him. Their eyes met in the pale dawn light. Something unspoken passed between them, a quiet understanding born from shared loss. But Martha's heart twisted with guilt. She'd brought ruin to the only man who showed her kindness. And she wondered how much more he'd be willing to sacrifice for her. The prairie was silent the morning Daniel saddled his horse. He moved with the calm resolve of a man already halfway into the fight. I'm ending this, he told Martha. Crow can't keep taking from folks who have nothing left. Martha stepped closer. And if you don't come back? Daniel looked at the sunrise, then at her. Then at least someone stood. He rode out, leaving behind only hoofprints and a heavy ache in her chest. Crow waited in Crownfield. Fortified behind the stone walls of the bank, he claimed to serve. His deputies lined the street, rifles resting on their shoulders. Daniel dismounted and faced them alone. You've terrorized this land long enough, he said. Crow laughed. You're just a farmer. You don't know what it takes to rule the plains. Maybe, Daniel replied. But I know what it takes to live with honor. The first shot cracked the air like thunder. What followed was a storm of lead and dust. Men falling in the street, horses screaming. The West deciding who deserved to stay standing. When the smoke cleared, Crow lay wounded, his authority bleeding out with him. Daniel didn't finish him. Instead, he turned his back and walked away. Why? Crow rasped. Because justice ain't about killing, Daniel said. It's about stopping the wrong. Weeks later, Martha stood at the rebuilt Reed farm, the children laughing as they chased chickens through the yard. The land felt alive again. Daniel rested beside her on the fence. You're safe here, Martha. That's all that matters. She smiled faintly. Maybe safety ain't the only thing I found. The wind carried there. Silence across the open plains, a promise of something gentle in a world that rarely allowed it.